Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed. I'm Arjuna, and this is the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. And today we've got a skeptic on. I've been doing lots of interfaith discussions, but I keep saying that title, and then I have things like Michael Ignor on doing, he's a Christian and so on. So today the tagline is appropriate. So Nathan, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just sharing it on my YouTube as well, so people will come in from there.
So many of you will know Nathan. He runs the YouTube channel Digital Gnosis. They do high-level internet atheism as opposed to, the internet atheism in the derogatory sense. So you find good philosophical stuff on his content. So if you like this, you'll probably like his stuff. I'll add a link in the description later. I made the YouTube event last minute, so there's nothing in the description. So once you're done sharing, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, where I'm at now is, I guess I'm interested in philosophy of religion for various reasons. Like, I get sort of pleasure, I guess, from reading about the history of various religions, studying it from different angles and aspects, and studying the various arguments. A bit about my background and what led me to where I am now is, well, I wasn't born into a religious family or household or anything like that. In the UK, which is where I'm from, where I went to school and everything, there's a kind of latent Christianity. I mean, the Church of England is literally a part of the state over here, and there are kind of Christian practices that are baked into our school system in various ways. So hymns and prayers and so forth in assemblies, which you do in the mornings, but not as extreme as it might be in maybe some countries or cultures around the world, because it's sort of secularized in a lot of ways, but that's definitely been an influence on me. I think then in high school, at least for the first half of it, I would have identified as an atheist, and that was during the time of the sort of new atheism phase. People like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens were doing all these debates, and I was vaguely familiar with that stuff. I guess I didn't have a particularly sophisticated philosophical view of the world, though. I just kind of thought science was the way to answer all those questions. I was probably a bit more like the I effing love science memes that you get on Facebook, like that group. That was probably my kind of like worldview at the time, which is a bit cringy, but there you go. And then towards that second half of high school, I think I moved more towards kind of agnosticism, even became interested in Eastern religions. So read the Bhagavad Gita, for example. I took psychedelics a bunch of times. I was really interested in people like Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, and various other people. And then I had like a weird sort of period of time where I had quite a lot of like I had surgeries on my knees from injuries that I'd had, and I was struggling with some issues around being adopted. And so during that time, I guess Jordan Peterson started to appeal to me, because he was kind of telling me how to make sense of the world, how to kind of deal with my issues and become a person, become a man and stuff like that. So I started adopting some of the things he was saying, and one of the things he was saying was that, well, Christianity's had this big influence on the West, and the archetype of Jesus is something that's really important. So then I decided I'd start going to a Christian church, which I did. I began latently adopting some of the beliefs and values that people there had, without having had much exposure or understanding of Christianity prior to that. Ended up becoming a Calvinist for about a year or so, and then I guess began questioning those things, had a deconversion experience, and then I have kind of fallen into I don't really even know where I'd put myself. I mean, epistemically agnostic would be in terms of like my metaphysical beliefs about religion and so forth. And then I think the symbolism of Christianity is still definitely like a part of my psychological makeup and the way that I relate to the world. So I've not, maybe agnostic Christian then, but then I'm not really committed to the metaphysics or anything. And and just in terms of that question, I'm 24 now. So and I'm a software engineer professionally, and next year I'm doing a master's degree in philosophy in Glasgow. So there's everything about me in a brief. roundup.
Right. So your journey to, your worldview is rather recent. Like, I've been a Hare Krishna for the last 10 years now. You're quite new in your current worldview.
Yeah, that's right.
So a lot of people might find it interesting, from an atheist point of view, taking so much interest in the study of religion. What would you say to that?
Well, I think it's undeniably like religion is undeniably one of the things that is part of the makeup of humanity, almost more than anything else. Almost as, I mean, maybe agriculture or I don't know. I think it's politics. It'd be difficult to find something that's had as big an impact on our psychological makeup, our kind of cultural artifacts, or morality, as various religious beliefs and systems. I mean, they're all sort of intertwined with, political systems and morality and how we choose to live and so forth. But I think if you want to undertake if you want to try to understand humanity, and you want to try and understand our origins, why the world is the way it is, you've got to some degree engage with religion. And then further to that, I think when you begin to sort of engage with understanding the history, the belief systems, what theology is, different kind of ways of looking at the world, it raises all these fascinating kind of artifacts, even if you just view them as purely the creation of humans that aren't tethered to any kind of like metaphysical entities or essences, divine essences or whatever. Even if it's just made by human beings who are trying to figure out their way in the world, it's still absolutely fascinating to do, I think. And I'm not entirely committed to the belief that it is just that, but I think even if someone were, it's still well worth doing, because there's no way you can understand. I mean, even just look at the language that we use in England. Like, it's so influenced by the King James Bible, right? Or influenced by Shakespeare, who's also in a very Christian culture. And the kind of, the narratives, the stories, they're all kind of like interwoven with Bible stories that people were intimately familiar with at the time. And so I just think the only way to understand where we are now really is to engage with religion and to sort of do what some atheists do, which is to just say, I'm going to dispense with all that because it's all just superstitious nonsense and I know better and stuff. I mean, I just think it's a bit ignorant, to be honest. And it's not very humble, because it's not like those people in the past were less kind of epistemically privileged than we are. I mean, we've got better access to information through the internet, or we've got privilege to more kind of scientific facts or whatever to inform our worldview. But we've not got some special epistemic access that we don't. We're still going to fall victim to all the same biases and cognitive biases and heuristics and things in our belief formation. We're going to be just as tribal in certain ways. We're going to be just as influenced by the social groups we're a part of. And I think that the only way to kind of defend against some of these things is to understand the historical forces that we are a product of. So studying religion is a part of that. And I mean, when you do so, you might begin to have an appreciation for just how Protestant, for example, certain atheist communities are, and you realize, like a Western American atheism is almost like a Protestant heresy in certain ways, it's just a worldview that's looking at the world in a certain way. I mean, the claim itself, right, is just that no gods exist, but a lot of the kind of individualistic beliefs and things that people have really do historically have their origins in this kind of process of the Reformation and people coming to America and various theological routes in it. I just find it fascinating to look into all that stuff.
I had a Hare Krishna academic on, Michael Cramo, and I played a clip for him from Christopher Hitchens. And he pointed out, it's so funny, the parallel between this atheist worldview and the Christian worldview. There's like, without science, people are floundering, years and years of suffering. The savior comes, and science comes, saves the day, and then there's going to be heaven on earth thanks to science. It's like the same thing, just in a different dress.
Yeah, I think there's varieties of atheism, of course, but I agree. I think some people have this view that they sort of become an atheist, right? And all of a sudden now they've got the truth, like they've stepped out of Plato's cave, and everyone else is like, still trapped in there in the shadows, which is what religion is. It's just used to control or something. I just think that's so overly simplistic. I mean, we still have like myths and psychological kind of illusions that we come to. I mean, most Americans is a part of some kind of political myth of America as the savior of the world or the American dream or whatever. And they're not questioning it. It's just because religion in general has had this really negative effect on their lives that they've held it up against the light and gone, yeah, I don't really believe in the resurrection of Jesus or whatever. That seems really silly. But I still think that there's going to be a bunch of sort of I don't know what the right term is for it, but there's going to be a bunch of parts of their belief system about the way that they view the world that is sort of based on religious myth, if that's the right kind of way of looking at it. I mean, it's not to say then that those are the same sort of thing exactly as like a religious belief about divine beings or coupled to like historical religious documents or whatever. But yeah, but I do think that there's a religious aspect to sort of I don't know, when we form ourselves in like social communities around like moral beliefs and things like that. So I mean I'd view humanism as a religion, for example.
Right. Yeah. So it seems like this about militant atheism that came with Dawkins and all that is kind of peddling out. And I mean, you get Stephen Woodward, who's still somewhat militant. He put out a video a couple of years ago where he's like, it was kind of his reason for being an atheist and doing what he's doing was mentioned, and he's like, religion does horrible things in the world, therefore religion bad. But I mean, it's like, okay, car accidents happen. Like you could have a vehicle that's manufactured in such a way that it's prone to roll, and horrible car accidents happen all the time. What do? Do we all stop driving cars? No, the engineers redesign the car so it doesn't roll, and then they start selling it again. And I guess there's big payouts, but like, you don't. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's just bad philosophy.
Yeah, I think you definitely would have to look at how that actually raises the probability of you like doing something that you'd classify as immoral. Like, I don't think you can just throw out a vague kind of generalization. I mean, I definitely do get an impression, like, and this could just be a bias or a stereotype, whatever, that secular nations are like better to live in, right? But I'd actually, if I wanted to commit myself really strongly to that belief, I'd have to actually start looking at some data between the prevalence of certain kind of like behaviors and actions and how that's informed by beliefs, and start trying to establish causal links between them. Because I mean, I think it's equally true that the Catholic Church has done a bunch of good through the university system or hospitals, say, or that Islam might cause people to, as much as Islam might cause people to become extremists in some cases and do certain things, it also causes people to like give to charity in certain ways and help people in certain ways. And it's a more complicated story than just like a black and white good and evil, I think, when it comes to religion. Though some beliefs do seem to push more towards some of those negative behaviors in certain ways.
But you're not doing yourself any favors by being so nuanced and reasonable in your worldview. Like, if you want to really gain traction as a YouTuber, you've got to be black and white and ignore all the strengths and the arguments from your opponent, and only focus on the strengths of your arguments, ignore all the weaknesses, and then you can be famous like Matt Dillahunty. There's a reason why Matt Dillahunty's famous and Graham Oppie will never be famous.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is just true across the board, like politically and everything. People just want simple black and white stories where you can kind of paint who the bad ones are and point at them. And I just don't think reality works that way often or ever. Yeah, it's much more complicated. I guess I try on my YouTube channel to paint some more of that nuance, but I'm also in a camp where I have beliefs which are opposed to the beliefs that other people have. And I think sometimes that, or often even what apologists are doing, is engaging in what I'd consider to be like immoral epistemic practices, for example, like deliberately misinforming people, or trying to develop like stereotypes in an audience towards a particular group of people. And I want to push back on those things, but I also certainly do feel a responsibility towards my audience to try and sort of like present as balanced a view as possible in certain ways, which means, you know, pushing back on someone like T-Jump when I think they've got a bad moral theory, or that their way of like shouting at people and stuff isn't like a good way at forming true beliefs. It's like, well, even if I'm with him in the sense that we're both, you know, we both think what Capturing Christianity is doing here is wrong, I've also got to like show that I don't like these so people don't just like, it's not just like he agrees with us on this, therefore everything he says is right. Like we should just be critical about all beliefs until we sort of like think we have good justification to believe them.
It's funny to live in a world where if you quote somebody or agree with somebody on something, you need to point out that you don't agree with them on everything.
Yeah,
it's like that should just be obvious, right?
Yeah, it isn't so obvious. I mean, I think one of the weird things about having a YouTube channel is the way it is kind of like, it's almost like weird kingdom politics, but through this virtual, you know, like your YouTube channel is kind of like your kingdom, and then there's like there are like political allegiances almost between like certain channels and their audiences, and who they're like willing to host or not host, and how right. or even like, I mean, maybe it's better to relate it to like high school gossiping, but there is definitely that aspect to it, you know, like there's the performative aspect to the public, and there's the aspect of I don't know, like which channels are like allied with your cause, whatever that is. And then I agree that those who, as for example, in like a more fundamentalist Christian background, or those who are in like a fundamentalist Muslim or atheist even, they like form their like alliances and kingdom and people that they're willing to platform, or, you know, actively willing to not platform and demonize and stuff like that. And it is a weird experience from my point of view. Yeah.
I'm in a no man's land because I'm the only Hare Krishna YouTuber doing philosophy of religion.
Yeah.
I don't have anyone's coattails I can ride or anything.
Yeah, there's got to be a big. I mean, how many Hare Krishnas are there like in the world though? Is it?
Oh, I mean, you get Indian population who, you know, many you could call congregations. So for them, it's kind of like, you know, they're the Indian diaspora, and it's like, you know, they go to their local temple. But like in terms of people that are actually like dedicated to the faith and understand the philosophy, as opposed, like for many people, Hinduism is just like a culture, like an ethnicity. Like there's the food, right, and there's the and there's the religion, and it's all just like part of the ethnicity. But for, you know, a Westerner who takes to Krishna consciousness, it's like a way of life kind of thing. And of course, there's a whole tradition in India of that for thousands of years of people treating it like a way of life. Unfortunately, I've got bad internet, so I think when you freeze, it's actually me freezing.
Okay.
But yeah, in terms of members, like in India, you might have like 1 million, or I don't know how. I mean, it's like 1 billion people there. So how many? Like they don't even count the people. So it's pretty hard to count the people who would identify as a Vaishnava. But then Vaishnavism is also bigger than just ISKCON, and then there's Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is a smaller subset. But so I'm a member of ISKCON, which is the largest in the West, and I don't know, in New Zealand there might be 1,000 devotees. In America there might be 100,000 or something. I don't know. It's hard to really gauge numbers.
How did you get into it? Was it at the airport? Did someone give you a thingy, or?
I was studying yoga at a natural therapies college, and there was a Hare Krishna doing the lunches there, and a couple of people were getting into it. I went to the loft, heard a talk, and the philosophy made complete sense to me. I'd left. I was a Christian from 11 till 16 and pretty into it. And then when I was 16, I got really philosophical and it stopped making sense to me. So I became eclectic, but I believed in God my entire life. And then when I heard the Hare Krishna philosophy, you know, I kind of thought, well, God exists. And I just, I'm not sure if anyone out there has like scientific knowledge about God. And then when I met the Hare Krishnas, they're like, okay, these guys have scientific knowledge about God. And so then I just dove into it. And that was 2011.
Right.
So I wonder if we'll get on to another topic. So what did I pitch? We were going to talk about dualism.
Oh, yeah. Dualism and reincarnation were the...
Because you did a stream with James, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, where you spoke about the Pamela case?
Pam Reynolds. Yeah,
Pam Reynolds
experiences. Yeah.
And I was engaging you with in the comments. I thought we should just do this as a stream. So you were
I can't remember all the details of the case now, but yeah.
No. So I didn't want to talk about the case. I wanted to talk about the logical possibility of consciousness existing separate from the body and reincarnation being the case, because you were pointing out that you think that, even if the evidence was good, they don't have an explanation for it. They just posit the soul and say, oh, the soul's this entity that explains all that, but that's not doing any explaining. That's just invoking an entity that does the explaining. Is that?
Yeah. Well, let's sort of. I think I think the definition of like an ad hoc explanation basically is where the entity that you're kind of postulating, right, is just becomes a description of the what's it? I always get confused between explanandum and explanans. Explanandum is the thing to be explained or whatever. But the thing that's supposed to be doing the explaining literally just becomes like a set of the things it's trying to explain. So it's difficult for me to think, because like my almost go-to example in my belief system, I guess, would be when people try and use God to describe certain things. But I mean, maybe that isn't going to work in this case. Maybe it will. But it's sort of like, when you say, well, why do apples fall? And it's just like, well, God has a desire for apples to fall that way. Or maybe a better example is the old, like the Aristotelian beliefs about physics, for example, when it's like, well, nature abhors a vacuum. And then there was like a whole physics of siphoning and stuff, where you might know of like stealing someone's petrol, where you sort of like put a pipe in and you suck through it and it creates a vacuum and you can pull the liquid out. And there used to be this sort of random, well, you can't like siphon over 30 foot or something like that, and it wasn't really clear why or how that fit with the old system of physics. And what ad hocness is when the kind of explanation that you're postulating behind why that's happening, all it does is just like describe the thing itself. So it just says, oh, well, yeah, nature abhors a vacuum, except when we get over 30 feet or whatever, then it kind of likes it more. And it doesn't tell you anything more informative. It doesn't make any predictions about how things will work under different circumstances. So I think we start building the idea of what an explanation should do is it should actually kind of like tell you about the way reality is working in a way that begins to inform these like different situations and stuff. You're like building up a model of the way it works. So if we look at, say, these near-death experience cases, a lot of the time, it seems to me like the data points will be, say, someone has an experience away from the operating table, for example, and people who argue that these near-death experience cases counter examples to like a physicalist model of the mind will sort of intimate that, well, if this experience is veridical, that means it really in some sense happened, like that experience is objectively an exact description of what's happening in the case. Well, the person is somehow disassociated or at some different location. But what I think in these cases, what they rarely ever do is offer what their explanatory model is. I mean, is it that the soul then, which is a non-spatial thing, is located at some different point in space-time? If so, what's the causal relation between photons, which are presumed, even on dualism, right, it's still photons that hit people's eyes that then go into the brain that then are associated to the soul, and the soul creates some kind of like qualitative representation of things. So
I think can we just pause that? We're going to have to go back to this one point because people are talking about it in the comments. So I thought you were an atheist, and then maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. So you described yourself as a Christian agnostic. So maybe you can just clarify that.
Yeah. I would classify myself as a Christian agnostic, but so I wouldn't identify as atheist, but I'm not that bothered, to be honest, about the labels.
Right. So you're open-minded, but you're not. Right. So have you gone back and forth, or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I occasionally go to church and stuff, and I'm interested in the Bible as more than just like a literary thing. I mean, I'm interested in religion generally is more than just sociological or historical phenomena. But
Have you
I
tried
do
chanting Hare
have.
Krishna?
I've not tried that. No, I could give it a go, but I don't know.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we'd have to set up some standards, I think, of like what would also disconfirm, like before doing it, what would disconfirm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We can talk about that. I had somebody who I convinced to chant 1 round a day. A round takes like 7 minutes. You chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra 108 times to constitute 1 round, and she did it
Right.
for a couple of days, and then her attitude towards meat was changing, and she could see it affecting her consciousness, and it made her uncomfortable, so she stopped chanting altogether.
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to give it a go.
We can talk about that later.
But yeah.
So back to your point. So yeah, you were talking about ad hoc explanations. So like if I say there's a motor vehicle and it has these properties, like you open the door and you get in and it drives and it does all these things, and I just attribute all the properties to the car as opposed to appealing to the laws of physics, that would be an ad hoc explanation.
Sort of. It's like if you appeal to the car's essence, right? If you said, well, the car has a car essence, and as you say, well, why does it turn left when you turn the steering wheel? And then your explanation was, well, a car essence has a proclivity to turn left when you turn the steering wheel left. But that isn't really telling you, why that's happening, in the same way that a description of the way that the steering wheel's hooked up to the front wheels and the drivetrain and everything, like, but in the same way that sort of is more informative, and it helps you to make predictions then about how maybe different cars with different mechanisms underneath will actually work. Instead, it just describes, it just kind of tells you the thing that you're trying to explain, which is the question was, why do cars turn left? By giving this kind of mysterious causal power with, you stop the explanation at the thing you're trying to explain, kind of thing.
Yeah. Did you want to continue with where you are? Where on your explanation?
Yeah, I can do with the out of body experience case. I mean that's it. The very thing that we're trying to describe is why there are the phenomenology of the report, right? Which is why there are these reports that people have of being outside of their body or at certain points that they claim of. I mean, from their point of view, is veridical. Where they see or experience certain things at different locations in an operating theatre. I mean, why is it happening either during surgery or after a heart attack or whatever? Those are all parts of it. And I just think that in terms of doing that explaining, the naturalist model kind of fits much better, because I find that people who are taking this kind of dualist approach to it seldom offer any kind of any attempt even at explaining the rest of that stuff. For example, why is it close to the body as opposed to anywhere else in physical reality in the vast majority of these cases? Or like I said, how are the photons of light actually interacting with the soul at that point, such that they have a visual experience at that point? Because classically, dualists are still committed to photons being involved in like the visual system. It's just that the soul interacts with the photons that hit the light at the back of the eyes. There are other things as well that I think fit better with the naturalist model, which is to do with like memory distortions and like retellings over time. So there's one study which was I'm trying to recall now because it was months ago that we looked at this, but there was one study that the NDE supporters often appeal to. And also tell me if you want me to stop so we can assess like claim.
Oh, there's so many points. Yeah, I'm just letting you go, but like there's lots of different ways we could go with that. So one is to say, well, in what ways and when is science doing the same thing that you're saying the dualist is doing? So this actually falls into the demarcation problem, which is how do you classify something as science or a pseudoscience? And my friend Seth Hart, who perhaps his PhD includes that topic, and he hasn't found any satisfactory definition of what's science and what's not science. You want to include all the things you want to include and exclude all the things you want to exclude. But I mean, of course, I was pointing out to him that I think this problem is actually similar to the problem of defining a chair, right? You give it's impossible to give a definition of a chair that includes everything you want to include and excludes everything you want to include. we can't do it for chair, why should we be able to do it for science? He has answers for that. We'll discuss that in a couple of days when we do the stream. But my point is that, so, you're saying ad hoc explanation. So it's like, okay, well, what about gravity? Is that ad hoc? What about the electron? Is that ad hoc? So every time, in any
I'd say
system,
no in those cases, I think.
In any system of knowledge, you're going to have fundamental aspects of your knowledge system. Like these are just, fundamental things that you don't have any explanation for. They do explaining, but they themselves are just brute or necessary or whatever.
Well, I don't think those things. So those examples you've given, though, I wouldn't say that I think they're brute or necessary. So I think what would be ad hoc, for example, would be to say that, well, things fall towards the earth because, and then what I fill that because in is just by the phenomena itself. I say because they have a desire to fall toward the center of the earth, right? That would be an ad hoc explanation. Whereas, like, I don't think that the current theories of gravity that we have are ad hoc because they actually sort of like tell us something more informative and make predictions about the way the world is. So they don't just say part of that model is that things will fall towards the center of the earth, like that falls under it, but they give us also like a deeper understanding as to why that is, rather than just sort of reframing the original thing that they're trying to explain.
But even the gravity explanation, I mean, you're just giving something which it's just a name for the tendency of things to fall. That's all it is, gravity, and it gives a mathematical, it numbers it mathematically.
I don't know what just is doing there. Like, I mean, I think it is in some sense. I mean, in some sense, it is, of course, describing what's going on there mathematically, right? But it's also giving us, I think, a deeper understanding. I mean, you could take, I suppose, like a completely anti-realist approach to what's going on there and say that the kind of like theoretical entities that are involved in that model, like maybe subatomic particles, right, like gravitons or whatever, like they don't exist, they're not interacting when that happens. But I guess the view that I take is that those entities do exist and are actually doing something. And the reason that it'd be like what's it called, like the no miracles argument, which would be just to say basically those entities are doing stuff in a bunch of our other theories, and so we can kind of like attribute, but by committing ourselves to the existence of these entities in this one case and all these other cases, we kind of have a model that just fits the way that all our data works across the board.
Right. So we could bring that back to the dualism problem and say, and the out of body experience and so on, that the thing that does the perceiving outside of the body and it travels from body to body is the same thing that occupies the body and makes all the perceiving and action possible inside the body. So, the argument, the question is, does the brain produce consciousness or reduce consciousness? So a reducer, like you get a reducer, it makes one pipe, takes a bigger pipe and puts it in a smaller pipe. So the brain being a reducer would mean, it kind of filters consciousness down into the gross physical platform. And while it does that, it's reducing the amount of things consciousness can do. So when people have near-death and out-of-body experiences, they often report seeing colors that they can't see ordinarily. Sometimes blind people can see, and they report their thoughts being more clear and thinking faster than they do ordinarily, which would fit this idea that the brain actually limits consciousness as opposed to. So the brain on this theory, or one version of this theory, would be something that gives us access to our cognitive faculties, not something that is responsible for the existence of our cognitive faculties. So that's why when you injure the brain, you lose access to cognitive faculties. Not that the brain, it's like a tap, So all the evidence we have that the brain produces consciousness is actually comparable to evidence that a tap produces water. You fiddle with the tap and the water flow changes. You fiddle with the brain and consciousness changes. But consciousness is just being filtered through the brain.
Yeah, I understand that position because it's something that I think I mean I used to think. That's not to say I mean I'm not saying that to say like I've therefore got more truth now, because I was like a younger and more naive version of myself. Maybe there's more elaborate version of that kind of like theory, right? That works better. I mean, those cases of blind sight that you mentioned, where people are cortically blind and they see things. I mean, my understanding is just that the spinal cord has certain capacities to recognize like facial expressions and things like that as well. So that explains some of those cases. I mean, I think again, this comes to which model. It comes to like which model like fits the data better. And I think you can do almost an Oppian approach on this, because I think a lot of the times people who are going to be committed to the what I'd say is like the extra theory, the one that's kind of adding some sort of I mean, you'd probably say it's natural, right? But it's some kind of something over and above what's going on in the brain and the biological stuff. I think is also going to be committed to it's going to be committed to all the things that our best scientific theories are telling us. So it's going to be committed to the idea that our spinal cord can do some of that visual processing, but then it's also going to be committed to this extra thing that the unfiltered, unprocessed consciousness is doing. I think it's really difficult from within that theory, assuming it's true, to get at that, but then also as a methodological thing to sort of set up what would the conditions of falsification look like for that theory? Like what would disconfirming evidence look like as well? And yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to say to what I've just said before I sort of go on.
I mean, I think the idea that something needs to be falsifiable to be a theory worth taking seriously is problematic. But I think the evidence should be falsifiable, which is two different things, right? I could have a reason for believing something which is falsifiable while it being impossible. Like I could have a reason to believe God exists. Like he might have appeared to me personally or something, hypothetically speaking. But there could be no way of proving God doesn't exist. And those are two different things. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's why I'm sort of phrasing it in terms of disconfirming evidence, right? It's not that I agree that a theory might just not be an empirical hypothesis, right? It might just be something where the only way of actually assessing it would be on like its virtues compared to other theories or something, because it doesn't make any empirical predictions. I actually kind of think that theism's sort of like that. But the point is, from our point of view as epistemic agents, it's what would disconfirming evidence look like for us. So unless we're arguing that something just is like an analytic truth, like it's true by definition, which I don't think, consciousness is more than the brain. I don't think that that's true by definition. I mean, I guess maybe someone could take that position, but I also don't think that the people who advocate for it are taking it. Yeah. I don't think the people that advocate for it are taking that position either. So then if it's a matter of fact, as it were, something that's kind of true about the world that we have to discover, then we have to look at, well, what is evidence that would kind of count in favor of it, but also what's evidence that would count against it, and then assess our kind of credence in the claim that way.
Yeah. So I mean, I think if you have an out-of-body experience where the person saw something that was stuck to the top of the fan in the operating room, or saw something on the roof of the building, it can be proven this person had no way of knowing that was there, and it can be proven that thing was actually there. Then that would kind of be, I don't know, I'm really not sure how you could give a mechanistic explanation for something like that, other than just saying, I don't believe it. Like, what is it, a Morian shift where the conclusion's false, so you don't really care about the argument or the evidence?
Yeah, I get what you mean. So you're saying that someone sort of provides an argument, like if someone knows this, then there is no natural explanation for the conscious experience or something. Someone knows this, so there's no natural explanation for the consciousness. And then someone just goes, well, there is a natural explanation for consciousness, and kind of runs the argument backwards, so they don't know this. I think maybe there's a bit of that goes on in these sort of situations, but from the evidence that I've seen when we sort of dug into it when we looked at the near-death experience cases, for example, particularly the ones that were being cited by Gary Habermas, it seemed like the evidence was quite sort of spurious, and that there were things like memory distortions and retellings and things which are really well documented in psychology, right? Going on over time, where people were sort of distorting the stories within the 2 weeks following the original kind of the original event. And then also people who were interested in the stories, who were kind of I don't know what to say, like believers in something more or whatever, and then helping the person to kind of like cohere and form a narrative about what happened that was slightly differently. And it just seems to me, I mean, from where I'm sitting epistemically, that all makes way more sense than the kind of belief revision that would be involved in the person. But this is like based on the evidence that I've got there, right? When I look at it, that explanation for it, that it's some combination of some original phenomenology which might be explained, I mean, depending on the case, because that it's generally either something to do with like anesthesia or the heart attacks. There's cases of like temporal lobe syndrome and stuff like that. But in general, I think there's some original phenomenology that takes place, and then after the fact, there's a combination of like memory distortions and biases and retellings and things that happens. That story, for all the cases that I've seen, coheres better than the other story, which is that there is a sort of disembodied soul. I mean, even there could even be an embodied soul, right, on the story that I'm going with there. But the idea of this disembodied soul that is disconnected from the brain, I can't make any sense of, because then I need something in my belief system to help me understand, well, how is the visual system working, right, without any input to the eyes? Like, why is it that there's a perspective of an incorporeal soul at a certain place in space-time that's interacting with photons and things? I mean, my position that I'm taking could be consistent with something like Thomism, right, or Aristotelianism, like a hylomorphism, but or it could be consistent with, you know, some kind of like type identity theory or something. I guess I'm agnostic as to that, but I'm saying in order to be able to make sense of the Cartesian soul that can be spatially located somewhere else, I need to revise a bunch of my beliefs about how vision actually works, about how light works and what vision is. And unless the Cartesian can actually offer me that, I just can't be convinced of it, because it just doesn't even make sense.
So there's some interesting data that lends itself to a theory which might sound quite far out, but just to jump right into it, the idea is that when we see, we're actually doing remote viewing all the time. It's just, you know, I don't know exactly how it would work, but I've heard quite a compelling argument for it. So I can't think of it. Rupert Sheldrake has some interesting research, and he said that like in the military, they train people that if you're spying on somebody, if you're following somebody, like tracing them, and you need them to not know that you're following them, don't look them at their back, look at their feet, because if you look at their back, they'll turn around and look straight at you. And everyone's got experience of, you know, turning around and looking straight at somebody in the eye who's staring at you, or the other way around. You know, you're looking at somebody and they turn around through a whole crowd of people and their eyes just lock straight on your eyes. It's like, part of them knew you were looking at them. So the idea is that when we see things, there's actually some part of our consciousness which is out there in the world, making contact with the world. It's not just like some Cartesian theater in the brain or something like that. And then you get problems like, if there's a Cartesian theater in the brain, then is there a Cartesian theater inside the Cartesian theater? And you get an infinite regress of homunculi looking at screens. So that kind of view doesn't work. You need to end the regress, and the best place to end it is with the first vision, the first contact with the external world.
Well, if I try and make, let me try. I want to understand that then, because even that, I mean, I agree that it would be weird, right, if we do have this non-visual sense for when someone is looking at us. But the thing that I'm struggling with is understanding what that model is that's being offered is like. So is it that? So let's say, I mean, I don't even really know where to start there. Like, is it that, so consciousness isn't there's no identity claim with the physical stuff of a person. The physical stuff of a person is like a conduit for their consciousness at a particular point. Okay, on that
like
theory.
on this view, you could even have what in New Age circles they call a walk-in, where you leave your body and somebody else comes in. And
But
like,
why is it? The thing I'm struggling to understand on that model, though, why is it that when someone else who is being conduited through another physical entity somewhere looks at your physical entity, that you would have a sense for it? That's what I'm not understanding, why it would actually even predict that. Because my model of what's going on there is not like filled in, it's just kind of vague.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something I've studied or discussed in depth. Akandiri Das would be a good person to
Right.
just. He's going to be having a discussion with James Fodor on consciousness and the brain and so on. And I think it's coming close. We booked it like 3 or 4 months out because Akandiri had a busy schedule, but it's happening at the beginning of September. So that should be good.
Yeah,
I should try to get Rupert Sheldrake on too, because he's quite big on this.
He's an interesting guy.
I mean, obviously your consciousness is tied into the location of your body. So when your mind is reaching out and looking at somebody, there's some connection back to your body. I mean, I'm sure you could come up with an explanation how it works. And I don't think we're going to have detailed explanations for everything, especially when it comes to consciousness. Like, we know how a motor vehicle works. You can talk about every nut and bolt, every law of physics that governing. That's why they can make cars, that like race cars where they have like a computer processing or anything. Now they make race cars lightweight and they just have little flaps that move up and down to make it handle as if they have weight in the right places. And they can do that because it's a mechanistic thing where we have the data available. But I think for consciousness and there's a certain layer where our ability to comprehend is going to run into a brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree, but I also find it very difficult to see something like that, even assuming it's true, as evidence in favor of non-physical consciousness if non-physical consciousness theories don't postulate some kind of plausible causal mechanism there. Because I don't understand how I can say, well, given non-physical consciousness, this observation is really, really expected, right? Whereas given physical consciousness, it's not expected, because we've not actually looked into what each of the theories does expect. I mean, maybe there is some physical explanation, right? And we've not shown why it's improbable on the physical theory that would be the case. But then we've also, and the other thing we've got to do is show why it would be probable on the non-physical theory, which we've not done. So in that case, the evidence doesn't actually do anything to my confidence in either of those kind of belief systems, right? It could be true, but it's not actually doing anything to my belief.
Well, I don't see how you could have a materialistic explanation for when you look at somebody from behind, they know you're looking at them. I mean, that tendency could actually connect to the other research Rupert Sheldrake did, which was on what is it? Well, there's one dogs who know when their owners are coming home, and there's another, when the phone rings, he did an experiment where you have 4 friends who you're close to. It only works with people you're close to, and they ring. One of them rings you, and you have to pick up the phone and guess who it is before you pick up the phone. And the person who rings you thinks about you just before they ring you, so there's some telepathic connection. And that's
the thing, though, is when you say, so there's some telepathic connection, but that's the very thing. What we have to do is lay out what all the competing explanations would be, right? I mean, maybe.
Well, I mean, if there's no kind of telepathy, then you would predict just chance, right? You got 4 friends, and you're going to.
Well, it's not just chance.
You'll get it right 25% of the time, right?
I'm not sure. We'd have to figure out what that probability is, because the person's presumably going to have some other beliefs than just like just the frequency, just the number of people, right? And the number of people that are going to call. They're going to have some beliefs about like other people, like a folk psychological model, right? Of those people, of their beliefs, of what their attitudes and dispositions are like. So we're not just going to do like that 1/4 division and come to a probability that way. I think these other beliefs are going to inform the beliefs that we might form about someone's propensity in a certain situation to call us or not, right? Well,
I mean, they're just it's done as a controlled study. So one of the 4 friends is told to ring you. It's not just like
I'd have to. Okay, Okay, I'd have to look into into what's
Yeah.
going on exactly, but exactly more.
Yeah,
but I do think
you'd be able to find the studies, and you could look
Yeah.
into it. But assuming it's done in a controlled way, like I believe, I didn't read the study myself. I'm a little bit gullible, I guess.
No, it's not that. I want to know what's being said specifically, in these cases. Like I don't actually know what's being tested then, if it's just
you want to read the studies. I mean, assuming the study's done this way that, four people are there, and one of them's told to ring you, told to think about it. You've got no idea which one it is. So it's not like you have a friend that rings you more frequently than the others. And of course you're going to guess that friend. And of course that friend's going to ring you more frequently. So it'll be above chance. It's done in a controlled way. Then, on materialism, you would predict that you'd get it right 25% of the time because there's four friends. But I'm not sure what actual numbers he got, but it was above chance.
But why this is the problem though, because you say on materialism you'd predict that, but I think on dualism I'd predict that as well. I don't understand on dualism why I wouldn't predict 25% in that situation where there was, say, a random, let's say, on the assumption that people have Cartesian souls of some sort or hylomorphic souls, doesn't really matter, but on either of those assumptions, and we have a random number generator that's going to pick, numbers 1 to 4, which will select the person who's going to call. And before they call, though, the other person has to predict who it's going to be. I don't see why the hylomorphism or dualism changes the fact that it would be that there'd be like a 1 in 4 chance of them getting it right on any individual trial. Why does dualism change that?
The idea is that there's a non-material consciousness which is non-local and able to connect telepathically or whatever you want to call it with people. So, of course, most people don't have those abilities, but to subtle extents we do. And what is it? I just heard some research that humans actually have an ability to tell north the way many animals do, but we're not tuned into it because we're so absorbed in everything else. But they did some research and they found there's some cultures. They found one particular culture who their language, they don't talk about left or right. They talk about north, south, east, or west. So whenever you're talking about things, you're saying that's to the north, that's to the east. And those people can actually tell just through their intuition which way north is. So it's probably something that could be, the telepathic ability could probably be developed. But the idea is that, that consciousness can go beyond the abilities of the brain, because the brain is just something that we occupy like a machine, and we can limit ourselves to the abilities of the brain, or we can have some subtle abilities that go beyond it.
I don't know about those studies either, but I do know in the birds that that use the magnetic fields of the Earth to navigate, that they actually do have like the capacity to sense the Earth's magnetic field in their brain architecture.
We should probably move on to the next point. What was the next?
Reincarnations. There was dualism and reincarnation.
So there's some interesting evidence from. So, for example, I mentioned Walken. So there was one case. We're doing a modern day debate on evidence for reincarnation in a week or two. I should probably start studying for it. Done a video on it already, but there was one case where there was clear. It seemed to be evidence of a walk-in. So the person, the child was like 4 or something, and they'd actually died, and the father was going to bury the body or whatever. It was like some village in India, and then the child came back to life, but the child remembered being a Brahmin and refused to eat food cooked by his parents because his parents were from a lower Varna that the neighbor had to cook from for a year, and that they could verify details about the person's life who died just before this event happened. I can't remember. There was some like points you made about what the evidence should look like for it to be strong, and I could show examples of that with reincarnation. I'm not familiar with the near-death experiences because I haven't really studied that, but I've studied the reincarnation cases. So you were making some critique of the cases that Gary Habermas gave. What were those?
Well, I don't think Gary Habermas actually. Well, I think part of our critique actually was that Gary Habermas doesn't mention the reincarnation. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think part of our critique was that he doesn't mention the reincarnation evidence, which is on equal par to the kind of near-death evidence that people in these like near-death experience kind of communities are kind of giving. And the reason that we were criticizing it was because we were saying, well, that is against the conclusion that the Christian wants to make, right? But it seems as well evidenced as some of these other claims. So I think that that was part of our critique of the sort of cherry picking of being,
Right.
you know, lowering like an epistemic standard for the near-death experiences, but then raising it when it might be like to do with a theological conclusion that's different from the one that they'd want to get to in terms of Christian apologists.
That's like an argument that T Jump makes, which me and the researcher behind this evidence is Siddharth, who's been on my channel. I think he debated James Fodor. So T Jump debates like Muslims and Christians who are like, you know, especially the Muslims are big on it, you know, scientific accuracies in the Quran, which prove that it's, you know, a divine book. And T Jump just pulls out all these scientific accuracies from the Puranas, which are like way more impressive. That's kind of fun, but it's the same kind of thing. I actually reached out to Gary Habermas, and he was very cordial, replied and everything, but he said, I'm working on a book, I'm too busy. But I wanted to discuss with him, you know, so because he's got a chapter in his book, and Samuel Watkinson said that, oh, Gary Habermas has destroyed this. Samuel's agreed to discuss it, and maybe I'll have him on, because it's like you're cool with the evidence for near-death experiences, but you're not cool with the evidence for reincarnation. They think they have an explanation for it, but like when I engaged with Christians in comments, I mean, maybe these aren't the best arguments, but a common argument was that the devil or some demon planted the memories in these children, and that's why they think they lived before. And it's like, okay, do you really want to go down that line? Because that opens us up.
How do you tell the difference between how do you tell the difference then between the devil it just ruins your capacity to do inference to the best explanation once you accept that it's like a way of doing things. How do you know that the devil didn't implant in Paul, you know, the belief that he saw Jesus? Like you just can't tell the difference. There's no way.
Exactly. It's a really bad route to go down, logically speaking.
I agree, and I think it's that inconsistency in like epistemic standards that me and James are eager to point out, because I mean we'd classify that as, I guess, an instance of motivated reasoning where someone is clearly using the reasons and evidence with a similar epistemic standard when it reaches the conclusions that they want, but rejecting it when it doesn't, right? And that's an example we'd put forward as like bad apologetics.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might find some things like that going on in science. I mean, I gave the example of gravity. Sure. I don't know if that's the best example, but I think you always appeal to fundamental explanations, like, you know, I think
psychology is really open to that.
Like petrol has a certain combustion pressure. It's like, well, why is it that pressure? You're just appealing to petrol to explain this particular combustion pressure that it takes. And of course, the temperature affects the combustion pressure too, right?
Yeah, I think, well, I actually would probably disagree in that case, because you'd be looking at like the bond enthalpy of certain hydrocarbons, right? So you actually can begin to build up this picture of what's the enthalpy of like the bond between a carbon and a hydrogen, and then you say, well, what kind of hydrocarbon is this petrol that's in it? And you can actually you can perform experiments about the combustion temperature or pressure of certain hydrocarbons, the enthalpy of that reaction with oxygen, and then you can make predictions about how that will work in different environments and stuff. It's not just I don't think it's ad hoc, because it becomes informative as to the way the world is. And then you can even make the prediction, you know, that, well, a hydrocarbon of this length would be even more efficient at this temperature. And then, you know, you can synthesize that hydrocarbon, and then when it's verified, it doesn't confirm the evidence, but you can look to disconfirm the model that you put forward. And it certainly disconfirms and rules out other models, I guess.
You definitely know way more about this than me with your big vocabulary.
Well, enthalpy is the measure of I can't remember if the definition of it is the measure of the heat released by a bond in its heat released or taken in by a bond in a chemical reaction, or if it's joules of energy, but it's definitely measured by heat in like standard. And the point is that there's like a scientific model here about a model that we're making about like the chemical constituents of like physical stuff, like different kind of petrols, different like hydrocarbon chains, right? And then that model involves like information about the kind of bonds that there are, and the energy that's contained between those bonds, the energy it takes to break them in certain reactions, and then we can make predictions about that, and then we can actually measure those predictions under like controlled circumstances and see how much it heats up surrounding water and stuff like that.
James Fodor is pointing out in the comments that it's all reducible to quantum physics and so on. So the point I'd make is that,
about that bit.
I don't know enough about it either, but assuming you can reduce it all to quantum physics, you still have a problem of, I mean, the same question can just be asked. You're just pushing it back. So it's like, okay, now quantum physics is being invoked. So obviously there's a point, if you want to just say the essence of the car explains all the properties the car has, then it's ad hoc. But if you want to, but there's a certain point where it's reasonable to just say this is fundamental. Like we don't know how electromagnetic fields interact with electrons. A field and an electron are two completely different things. They're categorically different. So if dualism is a problem, how does consciousness interact with matter? Then we've also got that same problem for electrons interacting with electromagnetic fields. And if it's okay for physics, then why is it not okay for consciousness?
And I agree that you're right here, because explanations have to come to an end somewhere. Or I mean, maybe they don't. Maybe it isn't a position I take, but maybe some people think there's like infinite regresses of explanations or something. But I don't. I think explanations do come to an end somewhere. But there are various reasons why I'd say I agree that to some extent that best model of reality, that isn't the dualistic one, but is maybe that like physicalist reductionist one, is unsatisfactory in some ways because our knowledge isn't complete. And then the question is, well, why is it okay for you to stop there, but not okay for the dualist when they do it in this other place? And I think the reason is to do with fit to data, because that other reductionist model basically fits all our data, coheres with all our best scientific theories and so forth, right? And it's also less ontologically committing, because the person who's going to be committed to some other theory is going to presumably, I mean, maybe they're not, maybe they're going to be an idealist or something, but in some sense, at least, even the idealist is going to be committed to these entities having an existence. So all you're doing is just postulating that they do all the explanatory work. I think in the other case, there aren't good reasons to being forced to kind of commit that other thing into your ontology. So in the case of those dualist examples, right, I think like the near-death experiences and things, I think the stories from different parts of the brain, like the parietal lobe, or like people with temporal lobe syndrome, or even the effect of, was it barbiturates, some of these anesthetics on and how they can interact in anesthesia awareness, right? Some combination of those things, which dualists are going to be committed to working, presumably being committed to our best scientific theories, to that being a real thing. Some combination of those with memory distortions and socialization biases after retelling of the story, which are really common. And then even belief formation and things like cognitive dissonance, so people presenting disconfirming evidence, but then it becoming like really awkward if you're invested, or you've become a celebrity on a news channel or something from your story. I think that those things can fully explain the data that we see. I mean, there are conditions where, like you say, it could become really, really difficult, like that. I don't know if you know the AWARE study, where it was under really heavily controlled conditions, controlling for all the types of things that I'm talking about, really. And I think there was only one good case of an NDE in that, and the guy was like reporting just these kind of like vague, well, there were blue people and stuff like that, which he could have known anyway. I mean, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm just saying when we do like the reason that it's okay, I think, to come to a stopping point of an explanation on the reductive naturalist theory is that it actually explains way more than the other theory, right? It's still insufficient in certain ways. Like, it doesn't tell you everything about reality, but it's way more informative. And so that makes it a better theory, in my view. I should have just said that and stopped there rather than rambling.
That reminded me of a point I wanted to make. So, obviously, if fraud is a better explanation for a given case, I mean, you could say you'd need to explain away all cases, but perhaps that's just unreasonable because what's that there's this principle and that some scientist or someone came up with that the amount of effort it takes to debunk BS is far greater than the effort it takes to create it.
I've not heard of that, but I mean,
it's true.
Yeah.
So
it does seem true.
Obviously, it's unreasonable for me to say, okay, you've debunked every case I've given you. We've gone through 300 cases, but look at all these newspaper clippings I just dug out. Look, there's another 300. And basically, there would be an infinite regress of, of cases. So there'd be a certain point where, like that, I've heard this point about sampling, right? So when you're digging up fossils and you're collecting fossils, at a certain point, you've got enough samples that you can say, we can reasonably conclude that the data we've collected gives us a good idea of what's actually out there. And you look like, the way you do it is, say you're collecting fossils and, every couple of years you discover so many new fossils you never discovered before. And then as every decade goes by, the amount of new discoveries declines. And at a certain point, you might discover one new fossil every 10 years. And eventually you're like, okay, I mean, maybe there's a few things we haven't found, but we can pretty much conclude that what we found is representative of what's out there. So in a similar way, if you go through 600 cases and they're all totally bunked, then it's like, okay, well, let's not waste these atheists' time anymore, kind of thing. So you do have to be, 600 is probably not too big of a number. I'm just describing a principle.
No, I agree. I think a really good example of that principle that you're describing is almost like it's also in certain religious texts and things. So, for example, a lot of Muslims will argue from the Quranic miracles, and then someone might take a cursory look then at some of those claims. They'll kind of go, oh, well, that one was wrong, or there's like problems with Quranic literary criticism for this one that the person was making. But the standard that the Muslim apologist will set for you being able to say that Islam is false is like this just like you'd have to devote your life to Quranic studies and compile everything. Whereas, any reasonable person is going to say, faced with this claim, doing a little bit of research into it, coming to the conclusion that the initial claims were false, whatever, is probably enough for you to be able to say, yeah, I don't think Islam's true. You don't have to have this like standard of having found, understood a PhD in like, ancient Arabic languages and so forth. And
yeah, I like that point. I mean, if there's a given religion saying we've got good evidence for our religion, you shouldn't have to spend 10 years in order to wade through all the evidence. I mean, obviously it might take like maybe it'll take 6 months of serious study. Like maybe that's reasonable. Like, like if you want to understand a scientific theory, how long does it take if you want to understand like a proper scientific theory? Can you just expect to go to like a 2-week course on it and have the evidence proven to you and have them prove, some obscure theory in quantum physics, which you're skeptical about? Or maybe you actually need to study it for a good 6 months. And after 6 months, you might not fully understand it, but you can at least be like, okay, there's definitely some substance to this. I want to keep studying it. Or I don't want to keep studying it, but I can see that these people are doing serious science and there's some substance here.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do think there are really unfair standards that are created for people in these kind of, particularly on these religious disagreements where people will expect, people who disagree with them on a particular point to have had to sort of almost get it like a PhD in the specific philosophy and history and everything of their religious claims. And I think that's just unfair for the average person to be able to reasonably like reject a belief system.
Yeah, I mean, we've got interesting cases. Like there was in America, I should find the details and make a video about it. There was a police officer, there was a lot of crazy cults going on, in previous decades. So the Hare Krishnas were being investigated. So a police officer went undercover and was living, in the temple as a Hare Krishna, doing the whole thing, chanting Hare Krishna, doing the service, doing the whole lifestyle, everything. And after a year, he told the Hare Krishnas, "Oh, I'm actually an undercover cop. I was just doing this because I got assigned here, but actually, I'm now doing this for real. I've become convinced that Krishna consciousness is true." So I think, I mean, obviously it depends community by community. So, you're not going to get a standard product of quality everywhere you go just because, one Hare Krishna community or one branch of a particular religion gives people bad experiences doesn't mean that religion's false. But the fact that something like that being possible, I mean, obviously it could be brainwashing, but, if something like that happens consistently and then you measure the people based on externals and the people are happy and, doing well, like so many Hare Krishnas joined, as teenagers and they were like doing drugs and all sorts of things. And at first when they became a Hare Krishna, their parents were horrified. And then eventually when they figured out what was going on, they were actually like, wow, you saved my child. So I think that should be a good measure of a religion being true, or, it should be beneficial to the people practicing it. If someone's saying, I found the truth, I'm seeing God, or, whatever more reasonable version of seeing God, of like that's more practical. If that person's like measurably mentally unwell, then we can sort of question their claim.
I don't know about I don't know if I'd agree to it being a good measure of truth, but I agree it's beneficial. I guess.
I think we've kind of gone into another topic, but since we're here, I think, so there's the question, like I guess it's related to consciousness. So, if someone can have a spiritual experience and they personally feel that this is evidence for them that a spiritual reality exists, and then you say, oh no, we can explain that with the brain, we can simulate different things with, cranial stimulation and all that sort of stuff. My first question, this is actually, we've got Craig Reed in the chat. This is an argument from him, so if you have an experience of eating a cake, it's a real cake. Like, it's not like you can say, oh, the cake is just produced by your brain and you're just imagining that you're eating a cake, your brain's just tricking you. It's like, no, there's a real cake out there. So why would it be any different for a spiritual experience? So one way I would say we can make the difference is, measures of mental well-being. So people who have a tendency to hallucinate and misperceive reality, there's other factors that go along with that they have poor relationships, that they have their mental health is measurably poor. It's not that you have people that hallucinate and fail to perceive reality accurately, who have quality relationships with lots of people, can interact with people from all walks of life, and are mentally stable and happy.
I think so in the first case about the cake and the religious experience, I mean, why would you not doubt one but doubt the other? And I agree, if your only model of perception is that there are these sort of I don't know, there's these sort of impressions of things happening, then it does seem that the religious experience just at that level would be on an equal par with the impression that you're eating a cake. But I think that they're very different. At least the religious experiences that I've had are of a very different, a very
quality.
different, a different quality, a different psychological state altogether than my everyday sort of experiences of physical things. But further to that, I think that our interpretation of our perceptual experiences is also informed by our kind of theoretical beliefs about the world as well. So the reason that I believe that there's an external world, well, I have these kind of percepts of like, physical bottles, and, it's spatially extended, and there's like a tactile sensation, and maybe there's like there's a sound and stuff. The way that I'm sort of parsing that together is informed by my theories about the external world, maybe some of my scientific facts and things like that. But the point is that it's, I don't know what to say, weighted sort of brings a term from neuroscience that isn't quite what I want to get at. It's sort of there's a commitment to these beliefs that in order for me to kind of, like, if there's an anomaly in that belief system that's going to change something about it, then there's all of these other auxiliary beliefs that are going to have to be overhauled in order to sort of like take into account that new fact. I think because these religious experiences are so kind of few and far between, like they're quite sparse. I mean, maybe it's not the same for other people, but at least in my case, there's only a few times where I could say I've had a religious experience. So there isn't necessarily all of this sort of theory of the divine that's coming and sort of interpreting that theory in an articulated way. But then the other point is that the experiences themselves are quite underdetermined. So a sense of well-being in my chest is very similar to maybe adrenaline before a sports game, or listening to a song that I really like, or something like that. It's not like a proposition. It's not like I am God resonating in your brain. It's kind of like a sense of a special feeling about time. And then I think when that's taken into account with this like auxiliary network of beliefs that you might have about the external world, or maybe the way that human psychology works and stuff like that, it actually does become plausible to interpret that one-off experience that you had through the framework of, well, I was just functioning differently for some normal physical reason. Maybe, I mean, at least in my case, that's as plausible as the theory that there was a divine thing interacting with me during those experiences and times. And I mean, I agree the experience itself is still very special to me in a lot of ways, but the physicalist account for why I had that experience is equally as plausible, even though I had it. I don't know if the way I sort of framed all that was useful, but
yeah, there's a few different points I want to make in reply. I'm trying to think if I can remember them all. So what was it? Consciousness. Yeah, so that was it. So you get like William James and people like that describing religious experiences, and quite a without adding like the Christian filter to it necessarily, just kind of describing the experience more so. And if you and you know, so people have their religious experience or spiritual experience, and then they add to it a filter. They interpret it based on their worldview. So a Christian and a Hare Krishna might have similar experiences, but one of them is going to say, "Oh, this proves Christianity," and the other one's going to say, "Oh, this proves Krishna consciousness." And so, if you sort of just take the experience itself, or what with the actual data that was presented, and separate that from the added conceptual, like the interpretation of it, then you'll find a uniformity cross-culturally and throughout history. So, you know, you won't have this like, you know, oh, but the Christians say the same thing and that's just proof of their religion. You get a kind of universalism.
I get what you're saying, or like a perennialism. Yeah,
like a perennialism.
I agree, but I also think I think that's equally consistent with what a physicalist is going to say, which is that that's because there's a common cause behind all of this, right? And that's that the neural architecture of Homo sapiens under certain circumstances like replicates this particular psychological experience. So of course that's going to, you know, work cross-culturally and throughout times and things.
Yeah, well, that's the other point I wanted to make. There's a quote which I can't attribute or remember very well, but it's something like, "There's enough darkness in the world for those that want to find it, enough light in the world for those that want to find it." I don't know if anyone in the comments or if you know that quote well enough. I'd like to be able to attribute it. I don't know if it's Augustine or someone.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that quote. I mean, I've definitely heard something like it, but I don't know where it comes from.
I mean, this will probably sound ad hoc. There seems to be a theme today that the basic idea is that, you know, this is the Krishna conscious explanation of why we're here and why, you know, divine hiddenness. So the idea is we've decided to turn our backs on God, and God allows us our free will, and in some sense he has to, because the ultimate highest thing is loving relationship. And what's a loving relationship if it's forced? So if we want to leave, God lets us leave. And so we're given all these opportunities to try to enjoy, and it's also crafted in such a way that it helps us develop our love of God and return back, helps us grow as a person. But a necessary part of that is it can't be like our ability to be ignorant of God needs to be available to us. So if you're going to find God, it's not going to be like because somebody came and smashed you over the head with the evidence. So, you know, like if you don't believe something about material reality, it's like, oh no, fire is not going to burn you. Well, you're going to get burned if you go about life thinking fire is not going to burn you. But you could go about life thinking God doesn't exist, and that ignorance is allowed to remain because it's necessary for us to have our free will to try to enjoy separate from God, so that we can exhaust our material desires and come to God willingly, as opposed to because, you know, God just came and said, well, here I am, love me. You have to love me because there's no other choice. You can't be happy without me. So I guess you're just going to be miserable, or you're going to come and love me. It's like, no, you go try to enjoy, and you can be ignorant of me if you want.
So sort of similarly to Christianity in some senses, I guess, it's not that reasons and evidence, it's not that you're rejecting or there aren't good enough reasons and evidence, but it's a kind of moral failure, which is why you're not seeing God, or you're not coming into that relationship.
The point I'm making is God, obviously God could just come down from the heavens or, construct, reality in such a way that there's undeniable evidence that he exists. But instead what he does is he makes the evidence more subtle. So it's there if you want to see it. An analogy I like for this is, suppose you're in a business partnership and the person's actually cheating on you. Like the person's actually ripping you off. But you trust this person and you want the business to succeed. So every time you see some evidence that this person's ripping you off, you just ignore it. You don't actually see it. And eventually the evidence comes to a point where you can no longer deny it. And then you look back after being ripped off, the whole thing's ended and you're broke.
Yeah.
And you think, I should have seen this. I knew this person was ripping off. How was I not able to see it? And the reason is because there was an emotional barrier, but also because, the person wasn't just like saying, I'm going to cheat you. They were being cunning about it.
What if you were someone who really wanted to see God, right? But you were really, really stupid, so you just couldn't assess the evidence and like form that belief?
Well, material intelligence isn't correlated with people, developing love of God. I mean, there's one story which devotees like to tell. It's in France, and Prabhupada's there. So Prabhupada's, he's our great saint. He founded.
I genuinely know very little. Yeah, I know almost nothing really about Hare Krishna.
So Krishna consciousness goes way back in India, thousands and thousands of years. But Prabhupada brought it to the West, and he made this whole international society for Krishna consciousness. And he was in France, and there was this guy who they called Pigpen, who was this homeless guy that's like some mental problem, did drugs, like really out of it. And he was interested in the devotees, but the devotees were always like avoiding him, this dirty homeless guy with mental problems. And they wanted nothing to do with him. And then when Prabhupada came to town, this homeless guy was like wanting to be around Prabhupada and get the mercy of him. And eventually he like touched Prabhupada's feet, and Prabhupada put his hand on his head and said, it'll be all right. And then after that, the devotees were like, well, Prabhupada's given him his mercy. We can't like just leave him outside anymore. So they brought him in the temple, shaved him up. And before long, he wanted to do service. So they took him out on book distribution. And he's they're like, well, I guess you can like hold books for us or something. Like the guy was retarded. Like when he spoke like a retarded person. And the guy was still getting out of the van, and this Pigpen guy, he'd taken the book bag and was already out distributing books. And by the time the devotee got out of the car to go see, the guy had already distributed books. He's like, well, what are you telling them? I'm telling them Prabhupada saved me. He's just handing books out to people and saying Prabhupada saved me. So my point here is, here's an example of someone who's got no material intelligence who got the mercy. Well, one thing it perhaps is correlated with is material distress, because often when people are in distress, they're seeking spiritually. What is it? There's no atheist in the battlefield.
Yeah, that was a funny one. That I don't know that I agree with you that people often do seek religious kind of comfort in bad circumstances, but I also know a lot of cases of, like, for example, the Church of England really suffered after World War One, not because people pretty much were like, well, how the hell could Christianity be true after I've just experienced all that? Like, it just seems like an industrial killing machine. Not just a problem of evil in like an argumentative sense, but I think in a lived experience sense for a lot of people. I've read a lot of biographies of people who were in the trenches and lost their faith and just couldn't, in good conscience, on a Sunday, go to church and hear people talk about the love of God after the experiences that they'd had as well. There were, equally also some people come to faith in those kind of situations. But yeah, in terms of what you said there, though, I think the point I'm trying to make is under that kind of paradigm, or under that theology that you offered, it seems to me like someone could want a relationship with God, but for epistemic reasons be unable to see those reasons, not for like the moral reasons that they didn't want that relationship with God, but just because they can't like see it because their faculties are like distorted in a certain way. And that would seem like a kind of unjust or unfair system to me.
Well, you get evidence for God in different categories. So, there's the artwork that's, like a lot of the best artwork all through history was produced by theists. Like a beautiful sunset, people see that as evidence of God. And then there's like, what do they say? There was some quote from some scientist. I keep having quotes that I can't attribute. that a little bit of science will make you an atheist, but a lot of science will make you a theist. So
I've heard that before. Yeah, I can't remember.
If you go deep enough into these things, you'll find God. Oh, there's some quote about quantum physics too. It's like, the scientists, climbed up this huge mountain. When they got there, there were like all these ancient sages that were sitting at the top all along.
Yeah, I mean, but I think when you unpack the problem with all of those, I think, is that when you unpack them, you just see that it's just someone saying that they think it's true, right? But that's not a reason for you to, if you don't believe it, it's not a reason for you to change your beliefs or adopt it. It's just them saying, well, my belief is that it is true, and it's okay, say you've got a physics, like James, for example, right? So James has got a physics degree and neuroscience postgrad, and now he's doing his PhD in neuroscience, right? So when someone says to him, well, I'm convinced that above physics is like these theological truths, I mean, what's that supposed to do for him? He's going to kind of go, okay, well, I understand the physics and I disagree. Now what? Is there some like further reason to,
What is it? You just go ad hominem at that point and just say he's just an apologist for atheism. He's just
yeah.
If he were sincere, he would come to the same conclusion as me.
Yeah, that's true. He is a pretty insincere guy. No, I think I do think that those kind of things obviously rhetorically work, right? But I think when you try and unpack what they're actually saying, it's just a statement. It's just what someone who already believes the conclusion is like committed to, but it's not gonna. I mean, it might kind of increase the confidence of someone who already believes that this really smart person agrees, but not. It's not going to do anything, I think, for the person who disagrees.
Someone said people with high functioning autism less likely to be religious, according to some studies. I'm high functioning autism. I think a lot of people in philosophy of religion probably are.
Yeah, or in philosophy in general. Yeah, I think. I mean, I've not got any data on that, but that's definitely my impression.
Oh, I mean, you hear the description of high functioning autism. It's like, sounds like every philosopher or scientist who's ever made it into the history books.
Right. Yeah, I think definitely when I listen to professional philosophers talk about things, it definitely seems kind of like symptomatic of certain like autism or Asperger's and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when it's like, I think there's a pathological level of it, but when it's high functioning and there's not really any pathology to it, it's just a high level of intelligence towards systems and a low level of interest in people.
Right.
Which is kind of what it takes to be an engineer or philosopher or scientist. We went off topic. Where were we? Oh yeah. So the ad hoc thing. So yeah, obviously the point I'm making is that if somebody, for whatever reason, doesn't want to have a relationship with God, God makes that possible. So even, of course, I don't want to question anyone's sincerity. I did it jokingly, but I don't really mean to say that.
Well, I guess what I was saying was,
yeah.
It seems to me like under that system, someone could want to have a relationship with God, right? Be like a non-resistant non-believer, but still not, because for epistemic reasons, they're not seeing, they're not interpreting those reasons in the right way, even though they want to have that relationship.
This is the kind of point that if you make it to Matt Dillahunty, he'll start spewing. You're calling me insincere.
Yeah.
You're just saying I'm an atheist because I have a bad attitude. Like, how dare you say?
Well, I don't think it helps anyone to present it in that way, but I think the content of the point that he's trying to make is like, I think it's very unfair to attribute to other people like their own psychological states, and to sort of go like, well, here's what you really believe, though. You really don't want to, even though you're telling me and you believe yourself. Really, you don't want to believe it.
I mean, when you're doing philosophy, it's like the problem of evil. Like, if you're going to answer the problem of evil with karma and reincarnation, then it's like, oh, well, now you're just victim blaming. It's like, well, sooner or later with philosophy, you do run into implications like that. It's just like, if I see somebody who's suffering and I can do something about it, I do something about it, right? Well, someone commented on a stream saying there's a Jewish rabbi who has this quote: "You should, pray like God exists, but when you're helping other people, you should behave as if God doesn't exist," which is an interesting point. So like, there's two different things, like a certain sort of philosophical side of, analyzing different things and, how can the world be the way it is and God exists, and epistemology and, God makes it possible for us to be atheists if we want to. But then there's like, well, I'm dealing with this particular person. It's like, well, here's a person on a journey. They're sincere. They've come to the conclusion. They've come to different conclusions from me. Like maybe if I had been through their life experiences, I'd come to the same conclusions. Like, of course, we need to be charitable and appreciate other people and deal with them respectfully. So that's a different thing. But yeah, that it's funny. I don't know if he's still watching the stream, but it's funny talking about someone who's so directly related. I'm looking forward to his discussion with Akandati, because Akandati quotes a lot of science, and I think that it'll be a really interesting discussion.
I think for me though that that is actually counts as like a piece of evidence against certain theistic like models for me, is that when I talk to people, it seems like, again, the data point in reality is that people are telling me sincerely that they're genuinely non-resistant and they want to know if a God exists, and actually that a lot of these cases they want it to be true because it would help them in various ways with their like psychology or how they live and stuff like that. And I don't have any reasons, any good reasons to doubt that, but the theory says that it's actually impossible for them to be that way and not have formed the true belief about the deity. And so for me, actually that counts as evidence against the theory.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think what you really do with this kind of explanation is you show that it's internally consistent. So like this explanation is just a response to specific objections. So it's situated in a dialectical context, but it's not a reason to believe in a particular religion or in theism at all. It just shows that we can answer those objections and it's internally consistent. The reasons for believing in it would be, philosophical arguments, scientific evidence, which points outside of the universe, that points beyond matter, and personal experience.
I guess what I'm saying though is that that piece of evidence taken on its own would be evidence against the other hypothesis, right? You could say there's other independent reasons, but then we'd have to like assess all of those. And I don't know. I don't know that there are already. I actually don't know that there are any of the sort of natural theology proofs that I would say I see as counting as evidence in favor of theism. Actually, interestingly.
What is it? My favorite arguments are arguments from consciousness and epistemology. I find the argument from contingency interesting, but if you listen to enough Graham Oppy and Joe Schmid and stuff, then you figure out the bar for entry for these kind of arguments is pretty high. And if I was going to get into that, I would need to be very dedicated to it. So I haven't got involved.
Yeah, I think you're going to need. I think an argument is going to need to have some kind of like personhood or agency. And I just don't see how that, because again, like the philosophy of like action or philosophy of like personhood and stuff is like really complicated. And I don't see how you can even begin to make those kind of inferences without first having those concepts like really well established.
There's an argument. We're kind of moving on from that point.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can talk about it later. But yeah, first of all, I should say, I see your point about, so your argument is kind of like James Fodor is sincere. This philosophy, this worldview entails that James Fodor isn't sincere. Therefore, it's the wrong philosophy. I mean, I think that's a valid argument. I would just say, everyone's on their own journey, and with a particular case, you just have some agnosticism about it. But part of the theology is that we are all envious of God. Even people who come to theism still have leftover envy in our heart for God. And sometimes when you say that to people, they get really offended. But what a Hare Krishna means by envy isn't the same kind of thing that might be understood when we use the word. So, I mean, that's still the right word to use, but it's not like envy in the terms of like I'm like a real negative quality, because we're claiming absolutely everybody has this quality. And it's just there to various degrees, and we have various degrees of awareness of it and various degrees of ways of coping with it. And basically, anytime you're suffering and you're angry about it, that's a way of being envious of God or anything. So these Christians that curse God when somebody's sick, whereas coming back to the problem of evil, I'm currently reading the Gulag Archipelago, and 10 years ago I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, and both of them make the same point that there's one chapter in the Gulag Archipelago about the problem of evil, kind of, and it says that, like, there's two kinds of people. You pointed out there's people that, in the trenches they become theists, and there's people that in the trenches they think, how could God allow such horrible things to exist? And Viktor Frankl observed the same thing, which was, he described it that people's faith was like a fire, and and the Holocaust was like a storm. So a weak fire, the wind comes and just puts the fire out. But a strong fire, the wind comes and turns it into a raging forest fire. So people that had strong faith prior to going into intense suffering, their faith became stronger. And people that have weak faith, that they lost it completely. And so in the Gulag, I should probably listen to that chapter again, but there was descriptions of, like, we needed the prisons. So obviously that seems like a crazy thing to say, but these are people in here suffering immense, we can't even imagine what that would be like. And they're saying we needed this, it changed our perspective on life, or whatever, it transformed our consciousness. And like people that were that were days away from dying, they were lecturing each other, whatever little knowledge they had, they were sharing it with one another, and they were like dropping one by one and each taking turns lecturing on what they knew. So that kind of answers a few of those points.
Yeah,
I can't remember what the other point I was going to make before I dove back into that.
I mean, I think those stories are really interesting. I do think there's a different way of looking at them. I mean, evidently, I became, convinced by the kind of stories that Jordan Peterson has to tell about the Gulag Archipelago and the Holocaust and stuff like that, about accounting for suffering, and almost like a kind of, I mean, he doesn't phrase it in those terms, but a kind of soul building or something. But I do think that there's a different way of looking at all those things, and with that different, I don't know if I want to say, like a gestalt shift on the situation. It's easy to sort of see from psychological theories about why people would become particularly attached to these, like, traumatic experiences that they went through, and it's also you'd want to see in claims about, like especially like Frankl's claims about faith giving people. So I mean, he says he falls back on, like, that Nietzschean quote, that people with a why will be able to, like, survive through the kind of trauma or whatever. But I mean, it seems that in certain cases that why was certainly religious, for Jews. I think he mentions Muslims, and I think he calls them Mohammedans in his book, and Christians. But it would be interesting to actually see data on, the number of atheists that went into those kind of situations and how they dealt with it. And this is kind of the problem, I think, with sort of anecdotal reconstruction, because I think what Frankl's got to say about his insights into psychology from his experiences are really, really valuable. But I don't know that they should be used to establish, like, base rates of certain belief systems and the probability then that they would lead to certain outcomes. I think that you need a different kind of data for looking at that. Though certainly his first person reports of how people are dealing with things are, like, insightful and valuable, maybe at a personal level for dealing with our own psychology or for dealing with how we might counsel someone else. I don't think I'd feel comfortable making inferences based off of what he's got to say there about the likelihood of an atheist going into, like, a prisoner of war camp and surviving or something, because for me, Frankl saying, people who lost hope died. I mean, that's probably true, but I mean, were there Jews that died? Did he just disconfirm? Like, what's the actual statistics that he's basing his inferences off there?
Well, the psychological point he made wasn't necessarily theistic. He was saying he made the observation that the largest number of people died around Christmas time. And he inferred from that these people were asking the question, what's life got for me? I know I'll be home by Christmas. Christmas rolls around, they're still in the prison. They're still in the camp. And so then they've just got nothing else to hope for. So they keel over and die. But people who are asking the question, what have I got to offer life? Those people survived. But often it would be something you might call materialistic. Like, I mean,
right, their PhD theses, I think, in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah, or a loved one or something like that. So, I mean, on Hare Krishna theology, there's a way of relating to other people which is materialistic, and there's a way of relating to other people which is spiritual. So, you could say that just a materialistic attachment to family members is a material thing. Of course, they're a spiritual entity. So,
I guess the point I'm trying to the point I'm trying to get at here is that so there's a way of interpreting it within that religious framework, right? But there's this other way of interpreting that stuff that sits outside of that religious framework as well, and seems to me to just be an equally plausible way of interpreting it.
Yeah, well, again, this falls back on the there's the lightness for those who want to see it and darkness for those who want to see it, which again,
but I think that's a moral accusation. Well, it's not that that's ad hoc. It's that's just assuming your own conclusion, because it's like, I could say something like, well, you're just a bad person, so you're not like seeing it the way that I'm seeing it or something. But it's not gonna, what's that? What work in the conversation is that doing? Is it convincing people who? Yeah. Sorry.
Do you have to attach a value judgment to it though? Do
I
I have to say this person's
a
bad person because they haven't come to the same conclusion as me?
Well, there's a value judgment in the light and dark, isn't there? Like people who don't want to see the light and people who do want to see the light.
Well, it could just be a statement of fact. It doesn't necessarily have to be a value judgment. You could still see
but if I said
people.
You're a bad and if I said you're a bad person for disagreeing with me, and you said, does there have to be a value judgment? I could say, well, it's just a statement of fact. You see that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I like to distinguish between what I term internet atheism and what I term philosophical atheism. So, like, you and James are doing, although you're not professional philosophers and you're not necessarily publishing in journals, I would say you're doing philosophical atheism. And then there's internet atheism, where you're just kind of an apologist for worldview. So I'd say there's a value judgment in that. But, like people who are actually seriously engaging with the philosophy of things, I really appreciate that. In terms of, just because someone hasn't come to the same, just because you're not a member of my same, someone asked, you could ask the same question about people who are seemingly sincere but are members of another faith. So I hold to a kind of perennialism or universalism, that somebody who's a member of another faith, who's got a similar practice or worldview to what I've got. Like often you'll find people within a given religion who have more similar beliefs within each other across different faiths than they do with people in their own faith. So if you get all the bhakti yogis of the different religions, their beliefs will be quite similar. I've gone off into some tangent and forgot how I got here.
No, it's okay. I agree.
Oh,
the point I was just raising was that, like, I understand that it follows from the framework that you believe, right? That the people who are the people who disagree have chosen darkness, and the people that agree have chosen light. But the question that I'm kind of trying to raise is like, well, what work is that supposed to be doing in like the context that we're in? So is it to sort of for the audience who might agree with your belief system, who kind of see, well, this person's disagreed, but here's the theological reason why that they've disagreed? Or is it sort of offered as a reason why I should like change my belief because I'm not believing in the light, but in which case, I don't believe that's true. So then what work is it supposed to convince me, or is it? And then there's equally, and then the point I'm trying to raise in sort of saying, it's not because I think you're a bad person or anything, because I don't. The point I'm raising in saying, well, I could just say, the reason that you disagree with me is because you're bad. And I'm just parodying it and showing you how kind of, as a tool to try and convince, it doesn't really do anything. It just makes you think, well, why are you saying that? Like,
well, here's a point. We can tie it back to my question about chanting Hare Krishna earlier. I actually made this point to Joe Schmid when I had him on, that I don't think armchair philosophy can settle these big existential questions.
Yeah,
I think to really get, just like and if engineers never left the armchair, we wouldn't have wouldn't have bridges. They actually need to go out and play around with the materials and do tests and figure out the breaking point of the materials and all that, so they can build bridges. So similarly, philosophy in the West has devolved to a large extent into an armchair activity. But traditionally in India, especially, there was a whole lifestyle that went along with it, and in Greece too. There was a big lifestyle component. There was principles that you had to live by if you wanted to access knowledge. So the point I'm coming to is that if somebody is sincere, then they'll be willing to try something, provided.
Yeah, I'm willing to try. But then, what is the well? This is, let's get into kind of, because I'm genuinely willing to do an experiment. I think it'd be interesting. But what is the experiment? I guess for like the Hare Krishna.
Yeah. So the Hare Krishna lifestyle. So the basic idea is that there's 4 religious principles, and then there's a 5th thing, which is associating with God through his incarnation as his holy name.
Okay.
So that's where the chanting Hare Krishna comes in. So we believe that God is identical with his name. So when you chant Hare Krishna, you're directly associating with God. Of course, God can choose whether or not to appear on your tongue. It's not just a collection of syllables which manifest God. That's where the other 4 principles come into. There's a lifestyle and an attitude with which you do it that make it actually work. So the 4 religious principles are truthfulness, austerity, compassion, and purity, cleanliness. And
sorry to interrupt at that point. When you say the attitude you do it with matters, does that mean you have to already believe it as you do it?
No, I mean, suspending your disbelief is enough. But like, if you're just like chanting Hare Krishna while you're watching the news, you're not going to get the result. But if you're sort of like tuning the TV off and thinking, I'm going to, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm going to give it a go, and you're actually concentrating on the mantra. So fixing your mind on the sound vibration, and like, you can't be thinking, this stupid Hare Krishna convinced me to do this thing, wasting my time. I'm gonna do this for 3 weeks. I'm gonna prove it's wrong. Like that. That's you kind of have to be like, if this is true,
yeah, I get what you mean,
and I want to find out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the Hare Krishna movement probably demands more in a lifestyle point of view than any other religion in the West these days. Of course, there's versions of Buddhism and other religions which have been quite strict historically, but you get versions of Buddhism today where you're not really much is expected of you. So we have 4 principles we follow, which is no meat eating, no intoxication, no illicit sex, and no gambling. So, gambling destroys truthfulness, meat eating destroys compassion, illicit sex, it destroys purity, and intoxication.
What's illicit sex? Sorry.
Austerity. Well, the general definition is sex outside of marriage. So
okay.
There's some question whether
4 weeks of that. I guess I could try for the experiment. I could try. I might get really horny like 2 weeks in, but that
I mean, what I would say for you, I'm just giving an explanation of the general thing. But if you wanted to give it a go, I say if you just stop eating meat and chant Hare Krishna for.
I'm already vegetarian.
Yes. Cool. And chant Hare Krishna for 15 minutes, or if you could do more, 30 minutes a day, which would be 4 rounds, and you just do that for 6 months, while studying some of the literature, because part of it is actually they're studying the book, so you have some idea what you're doing when you're chanting and what it's all about. Then my expectation would be you'd have some kind of experience, and if you do that and you don't, then well, you just weren't doing it properly.
There's like no way for it to be wrong. I mean, I'm definitely willing to give it a try, but I also, on the assumption that it's false, I also expect myself to experience something, because like chanting for 45 minutes, right, every day, and to expect there to be no different psychological state you go into, I think would be pretty crazy. It's like if I said, like run for an hour a day or something, or listen to classical music in silence for an hour a day. Like, I think that you're going to have an experience that's different from your normal experience under those conditions. The same as, repeating like a word for 45 minutes as well. But I guess only you go ahead.
It was actually a study someone did, and I cannot remember the study, but I've been meaning to interview the guy who did it. where he had people chanting Hare Krishna, but he also had another control group chanting another mantra, which was completely made up, but it sounded like Sanskrit words. So he just rearranged some Sanskrit syllables to make it sound like it. And again, I can't remember the study. I think he got some result. I can't quote it.
Well,
but that's a way you could test it. So you could try for another, you could, for 1 month, you could chant Hare Krishna, and for 1 month, you could chant Coca-Cola. Or I could give you 2 mantras and you don't know which one's the real mantra. That's how you have to do it properly. If you're chanting Coca-Cola, you're going to think, well, I know what I'm chanting. I'm chanting Coca-Cola, and this isn't going to give a result. But,
I think Coca-Cola would give a result as well, actually. I do think that chanting Coca-Cola for 45 minutes every day for 6 months would give a result.
I mean, you get people who chant Hare Krishna non-stop. Like there was one Babaji living in the temple under Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur who all he did was chant Hare Krishna. He was always chanting, always. I don't know if somebody could do that with Coca-Cola. Like you have to be getting. The Sanskrit word is rasa. Like you're getting a taste, like a spiritual emotion, like a kind of pleasure from it. Pleasure doesn't really do the word justice, but I think you get what I'm going at with the word rasa. From it. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. Like people that play video games that are addicted, people that do drugs, whatever people do incessantly, they're enjoying. And it doesn't make sense that you could just enjoy a sound vibration. And not only that, there's this Atmarama verse in the Bhagavatam, which is given as a proof. Of course, you have to accept the scripture as true in order to accept the verse. But the philosophical point holds, like hypothetically speaking, that if people who are familiar with certain tastes which are considered to be high, so like someone's addicted to cocaine or whatever and they manage to get off that and find something better, if you can give up a lower drug by experiencing a higher drug. So there's a verse in Bhagavad Gita, param drishva nivartate, one that gives up a lower taste by experiencing a higher taste. So like people who give up drug addictions, they often get into some kind of philanthropy, like ex-alcoholics will spend a great deal of their free time helping other people become free from alcohol. And this is because there's a higher taste there, and they need that higher taste in order to sustain giving up the alcohol. So similarly with religious practice, if these people can lose all interest and not even be enticed by women, intoxication and whatever other material pleasures the world has to offer because they're getting a higher taste from chanting Hare Krishna, then I would say it's proof that they're connecting with a spiritual reality. And if you can do the same thing, then you can have that proof for yourself. So seeing someone else do it is a kind of proof, but then experiencing it for yourself is the real proof.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely willing to give it a go. I still do think that any word would produce the same results for me, but I'm willing to try it, right, and be shown to be wrong about that.
I'm trying to think. I wonder if I can come up with 2 different mantras to give you to make it a controlled experiment.
Sure, yeah, and it is quite a big commitment as well. Like 6 months of doing something every day. I mean, like that's more than I have committed to my own health in the past 6 months in terms of like going to the gym. Right? Like,
I mean, if you're doing it for like a month and you're noticing absolutely nothing, then you might just give it up. Like,
okay,
I'll
try
an incremental thing. And also reading, I'd say like, even just 15 minutes a day of reading something about Hare Krishna philosophy. There's any number of books you could read.
Yeah, well, I'll try it and see what happens for sure. If you want to send me like a mantra and like fake mantra or something, and I can compare them and see, I'm happy to try that as well.
It would be fun. Yeah, I mean, obviously I couldn't give you the Hare Krishna mantra if I was going to give you a real mantra and the fake one, because I think you've probably seen Hare Krishnas on the street and you'll know that one. So
I genuinely don't. I've never come across a Hare Krishna in real life, apart from obviously...
Well, one of them will have Hare Krishna in it, and one of them won't.
Well, yeah, but I meant I don't know if there's something that doesn't contain. Well, there was another question I was thinking while you were saying.
Yeah, I could find a different mantra that would have. Actually, I know what I could give you. So I know one I could give you for the devotional one. Because for it to work, according to our philosophy, it's got to be in disciplic succession. I can't just take my own names of God and make something up. But I thought of a mantra I could give, which you'll have never heard before. So I'll come up with 2 mantras. We'll do a controlled experiment.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. The other thing I wanted to ask though is why does God want you? Or I suppose God's probably the right word to use. I just don't know a lot about this theology, so apologies if it's not. But I mean, why does God want you on this theology to chant his or its name consistently, as opposed to like getting a medicine degree and like dedicating your life to physically helping people or something like that?
Well, the two aren't mutually exclusive. So actually, a lot of spiritual religious movements or whatever, they either have monastic priests or they have married priests. But Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vaishnavism is unique that we've got Grihastha, which means family, men and women, and also the monastic ranks. So you can totally do both. Obviously, if you're getting a medicine degree, it's pretty involved, and it might be hard to do all of the. Sadhana is the word for the practice. So there's sadhya, which means goal, and sadhana, which means the practice you do to get there. So lost my train of thought. Someone's saying I should do something too.
I don't know if there's like you should stop doing it for 6 months. No, I don't know what could be. I mean, maybe you could try for a time period like chanting a word that isn't like a Hare Krishna thing and just seeing if it does the same thing or something like that. I mean, that would be interesting.
I mean, I've taken vows to chant Hare Krishna 16 rounds a day. So
yeah, I wonder. I mean, like if you could also do like a different one as well and just see if it does the same thing. You know, like I don't know, like beech trees are not ash trees or something, and like say it like over and over again and just see if you start getting the same like feelings and things.
I mean, you see, I do look at looked at a bit of Christian music and stuff, and I think when you see Christians chanting hymns in church, and you look at Hare Krishna's chanting bhajans or chanting kirtan, and you look at the expressions on their faces, it looks like they're doing the same thing. And given my universalism, I would accept that they're doing the same thing, that they're connecting with God through sound vibration, through music. But
what about how about atheism is
with
true?
Rock music,
like, something, yeah. Like if you repeat to yourself, atheism is true for like an hour a day or something.
Right. Where's it going? Oh yeah. So
rock music.
Rock music and what people do at a stadium. Like you could say it's a similar thing. They're chanting music, they're getting all these emotions going. But the difference is, the kirtan, people do that, and then they go home and they give up drugs, they give up meat. Their parents are like, wow, my child's been transformed. Rock music and rock stadiums and yelling and cheering, the people don't become transformed. Or whatever vices they've got remain the same or get worse. Or, the chanting at a rock stadium doesn't do anything for that, whereas the chanting of Hare Krishna does. I mean, I've seen it happen so many times. People join the Krishna consciousness movement, and they'll give up all sorts of bad habits. There's so many stories about people's parents being like, wow, my kid's been saved. So I think that is a testament to, I mean, the same thing could be happening with Christianity and lots of other religious movements or religions, and I wouldn't have any problem with that. You could compare the quality of the religion by how successful it is at getting people to give up their vices.
Yeah. Maybe that would be a good idea, but I do think like as a theoretical point that I don't know why the truth of a religion would be predicated on it getting people to give up their vices. Like maybe God would want people to be addicted to heroin, or maybe there's like an evil God, right? Or I think there's more things that are needed to get to the point where that is like confirmatory evidence. But
well, the philosophy would be that point I made about param drishva nivartate. So, I mean, in one sense, reality is consciousness. Like, what is reality without consciousness? So, if something's giving us a higher pleasure, of course, the word pleasure kind of has a hedonistic implication. So, I don't mean it in a hedonistic way. I mean it like sort of, in the broadest possible sense, like, the difference between an alcohol addiction and the pleasure you get from helping other people give up their alcohol addictions. Both of them are a kind of pleasure, but one's higher than the other. So if something gives a higher pleasure, and you can prove that by the person being strong in the face of temptations, whereas someone who, like, someone who's not helping other people give up their alcohol addictions, who's an ex-alcoholic, might very easily fall into their alcohol habit again. Whereas somebody who is getting that higher pleasure might never fall into that habit again if they manage to maintain their rasa of helping other people. And you could go even higher through devotion to God, is the argument. And so hypothetically, that's the case. And I say if we can prove it with social science, then we have a compelling case.
The point I was trying to raise is that, so like theoretically, right, what could be true of reality, and I can't see a contradiction in this, so it's at least logically possible, is that there could be an evil God who wants people to suffer and have miserable lives. And so actually a religion leading to people having more pleasure, that would be evidence of it being false if that God exists, right? Because they wouldn't be truly following the God if they had like a religion that made them happy. And I'm saying that at least seems to me to be, like if I take away all theoretical commitments and just look at it in an unbiased way, it's at least a logically possible theological story about reality. And I think that should be on the table as well, as if I'm like trying to dispassionately assess the evidence in favor or against.
Well, we'd have evidence against that theology and evidence for the theology which I'm presenting.
But this wouldn't be. Well, this wouldn't be the evidence, though. I guess this is where you'd have to. I mean, I'm sure you'd offer some like different. You'd say, well, it's inconsistent with the theology that I'm offering, right? But then you'd establish that theology through different means of reasoning, different lines of reasoning, to the point where you'd already have to be committed to the truth of that theology in order to be able to interpret the. You'd have to already be committed to that theology through independent lines of reasoning in order to see people coming to helpful beliefs as evidence in favor of that theology. Does that make sense? Like, so the only way to see the evidence in that way is if you're already committed to its theory.
If you've accepted the epistemology that I offered of harm?
Well, you'd have to. You'd already have to have accepted, I think, like a kind of theistic God exists, and that theistic God cares about the well-being of people, or that good is defined in this specific sense. That whereas I don't think we should do that if we assess the evidence kind of dispassionately.
Well, I would say we have. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The evidence. So you have a theory that God exists in this way, and God cares, that interacts with us in this way, and these are the predictions we make based on that. And the predictions are that, if Krishna consciousness is true, these are the things we expect, and then the things we expect are that by chanting Hare Krishna, you'll give up your vices and you'll experience a kind of happiness, that not a hedonistic kind, but something on a soul level, a kind of satisfaction. And if that all checks out, then that would be evidence for the hypothesis in question.
So I think and I'm not saying this, I mean, I feel a bit like bad saying this because I'm just disagreeing with what you say, but like in the first case, if it's like a deductive argument that you're offering, that if Krishna consciousness is true, then we would see this, we see this, therefore Krishna consciousness is true, that would be affirming the consequent, right? Not affirming the consciousness. But I guess you could put it in like Bayesian terms, that like on this observation, given this hypothesis, making this observation is more probable than given this hypothesis, like naturalism, something making this observation in Bayesian terms, and that would be like a more valid way of putting forward the argument. But I'm saying that I don't think I'm actually committed to the given this hypothesis it is more probable, because it seems just as probable to me that we'd make the observation given like any other theory. So I don't see how I could make that kind of like Bayesian argument of comparing and contrasting probabilities. Like I mean, given naturalism, it seems just as probable that we'd make the observation that people would join religious organizations and have positive benefits from doing so. Given evil God, hypothesis, it seems just as probable that people would have a bad epistemology, so come to form false beliefs about a good God who doesn't exist, and then experience positive benefits from those false beliefs. I mean, so yeah, I don't think I'm committed to the
maybe I
premises
wasn't understanding the evil God hypothesis. So wouldn't the evil God want us to be unhappy? So if we practice a religion and become happy, that would be inconsistent with the evil God existing.
Oh no, it wouldn't, because you've just formed false beliefs, right? The same way that people who disbelieve, so it's symmetrical in the sense that, you know, people who disbelieve on good God theism, right? They've just formed false beliefs about the God. Well, the same thing is true on evil God theism.
Where does the evilness come in? So the God's making us happy. Where's the evil?
Oh, no, it's a false belief in God that's making you happy. On that theory. I'm not telling you that that's the way reality is. I'm saying that on the evil God hypothesis, you've formed a false belief about a good God that doesn't exist, that's making you happy, but it's not veridical.
But on this hypothesis, there's an evil God that's making us have this false belief.
No, there's no God making you have this belief. It's just you and false beliefs that are making you have that belief. And there's actually an evil God that exists.
Naturalism.
No, it's evil God. It's evil God world, where the world's actually been created for our suffering.
So how is it the case that religion makes us happy on that view? How is that a prediction?
Because it's a false religion. So people form false beliefs still on that view. So what, like, on the view that there's, it's the same. It's just symmetrical to, what it's symmetrical to is the Christian or the Muslim saying that the reason that people disbelieve, right, the reason that people join other religions, I mean, maybe this doesn't apply to you as like a perennialist, but it's just the same as people saying, well, atheists have formed false beliefs about the way reality is, but they can still draw comfort from their atheism, or they can still experience happiness from certain false beliefs. It's just that they have false beliefs, and what's in question is whether reality is the way they believe it to be or not. Now, if you flip the hypothesis, so as it's the evil God hypothesis, people are just forming false beliefs about a good God that doesn't exist, and that's bringing them pleasure and happiness. But on this hypothesis, there's actually an evil God that exists. It's not that evil God is giving them happy beliefs when they form the false belief. It's that the false belief is giving them happy beliefs. But I'm saying that that's just as expected on the that observation is just as expected on the hypothesis as it is expected on the hypothesis that there's a good God as well. I can't see a good way of distinguishing between the two.
Well, on the version on the theology which I'm advocating, it's a prediction. It's explicitly there in the text. Whereas on the evil God hypothesis, it's not a prediction. It might be consistent with the theory, but it's not something you'd expect to find. Is that accurate?
I mean, the first part must be, because I don't think you're like not describing to me accurately the content of like the religious beliefs that you have. So it must be a commitment of but I don't think that it's true that it would be unexpected on the evil God hypothesis, because I mean, I've just told. I can just tell you a metaphysics about evil God world, right? Where people form these false beliefs that lead to, because I'm just describing, I'm just painting the picture of what the theology and metaphysics are of that world, which is just that people form false beliefs about deities in that world, and that leads to them having false beliefs about God, which lead to them having pleasure.
I mean, something not being unexpected, like it being consistent with the theory, is very different from it being something we would expect to find.
Well, you'd expect to find it just in case people have imperfect epistemic faculties, right?
Well, we wouldn't expect to find happiness from religion any more than we'd expect to find happiness from any other false belief, right?
I suppose it depends. It's because it's not the falseness of the belief that would be bringing the happiness in this case. It might be various other psychological facts. So it might be the community, for example, or it might be it might be the fact that it gives people like purpose or something. So it's not the fact that it's false that's bringing about the pleasure, but it's actually these other things that would be bringing about the pleasure. And I agree that the existence of that pleasure is a problem for evil god theism, but then you just get into like the, well, flip it, and the existence of evil, right, is, and that's the point that's being raised in general. But I don't
too much good.
Yeah, but I don't think it. I think I see it as being kind of symmetrical, and to be honest.
This comment needs to be addressed. A prediction can not be post hoc. Theological hypotheses are mostly post hoc. That's just not true. Science all the time makes post hoc explanations.
Yeah, it depends on what we're doing, I think. I mean, I don't think it's complete. A prediction by definition can't be post hoc.
Well, often the word prediction is used in a loose sense because, philosophically, what other word are you going to use? We would expect to find this if this theory were true. The world is this way. So you call it a prediction because it fills the same role. But Graham Oppie, who's an atheist philosopher, he disagrees with this. He gives the example of the perihelion, or whatever the word is, of Mercury.
Right, of Mercury. Yeah.
And it was, we knew that it had this irregular orbit, but we had no explanation for it. Einstein came along, the general theory of relativity. All of a sudden, we had an explanation for it. And this counted as evidence for the new theory.
Well, I think the perihelion of Mercury is like the wandering. It is the wandering planets, where the theory was just that there are these planets that randomly have different orbits, and I think it was the the elliptical orbits of, I forget who it was, whether it was Kepler that made that put forward that model, but it was the elliptical orbits, I think, which and heliocentrism with elliptical orbits that like painted a model where that happened.
That's the word retrodiction. The retrodiction of the Hare Krishna theology. Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't fit in a sense.
I think we do that.
Prediction.
I think we do that in like with specifically like theoretical science. Like we do it quite a lot, where we evaluate like models and theories against each other, and then like go with the best one. And then tune
in a few days for Seth Hart. We're going to do the demarcation problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be a good episode.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, so no, it's okay. Don't worry. Yeah, I look forward to that. Let someone who knows what they're talking about talk about it. Yeah.
I'm going to have to wrap this up soon, but I think one last point we can discuss, or that I can offer back, is that we're also getting into a question of does truth and beauty track, or does truth and what brings happiness track? And like Jordan Peterson makes this point. I don't know how good of an argument it is to someone who's skeptical, but I do think there's something to it that, how could all these narratives, these religious narratives, have such a profound impact on humans for so long and such a deep level without having any truth to them? I think there's a valid point there. So that this idea that something could bring us deep happiness greater than we find from other things, but not be true, I think that's problematic. But of course, somebody could just disagree because it's kind of an axiomatic point about truth and happiness and beauty and so on.
So the question was, how could all of these religious stories and so forth have been preserved without having any truth to them?
Not how they could be preserved, how they could have such a powerful impact on people.
Okay. How could they have such a powerful impact
so deeply
without having any truth to them? And yeah, I think someone could just say, well, they couldn't without having any truth to them. So they have some truth to them, right? But not enough truth to establish the metaphysics.
Well, I mean, I disagree with a lot of Christian metaphysics. So there's that. Yeah. But I do think there's some powerful points to the narratives which are true, which you find common to a lot of religions.
I mean, I agree. I guess I see it as just as sort of plausible to tell a story about either like a kind of selection effect, or like like a pragmatic, like which of these stories kind of worked, or which of them led to the cohesion, like group selection, things like that, or which of these stories actually do appeal to our psychologies on a naturalist account in such a way that they help us to survive and stuff. But I don't see any of that entailing that their metaphysics is actually correct, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's something that people could object to reasonably. I think this is an interesting point. I wanted to comment on this. I think there's a difference. So Alex is saying, I think there's a difference between making a reason that fits the data and having a theory that also happens to answer data already existing. So this was a point I wanted to make, but didn't get to that. What I'm offering here with the Gaudiya Vaishnava theology is not like some ad hoc theology. Hermeneutically, it can be traced back that this is what Sri Chaitanya taught. Sri Chaitanya was expanding on teachings that go back to Madhvacharya. It goes back all the way into cyclic succession, and it's commenting in an accurate way that's faithful to the direct meaning of Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita as the primary text. So I think there's something to be said about, like, if you're claiming there's divinely revealed knowledge, this idea that, it was just given to me in the basement last night by God is a little bit far-fetched. But this idea that, God's preserved this knowledge through history. It's there in these ancient texts. They've got this beautiful Sanskrit meter. So many great people have expounded these teachings and they're still preserved to this day. I think that's something worth taking seriously.
Yeah, sure. I also think that's interesting. How would I answer that? Because I've obviously not invested that much time into investigating the claims of like certain religions, right? And maybe that means I don't think it's worth taking that seriously, but maybe like I'm wrong about that, because I think I am. I've just not had the time. Well, I guess I don't classify it as important then as like learning about other things that I spend my free time learning about. Yeah, that's an interesting.
Unlimited numbers of things to study, right? So yeah, maybe you'll find it interesting later on and go and look into it. Maybe you hadn't heard about it, right? Now you've heard about it.
Yeah. I definitely think it's worth looking into, and I want to do the Hare Krishna experiment. So I'll try that.
I'll talk to somebody who's a bit more knowledgeable than me and see what they suggest. Cool. So thanks for coming on. Any final points?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me on. It was all a bit sort of random because I think you've been busy and that you booked a bunch of people in, so you sort of forgotten about it a little bit. But that's fine.
Yeah.
I think we've had an okay conversation.
It was good having a free flowing discussion. I've got, what is it? T Jump and Michael Ignor debating consciousness in the brain tomorrow, so that should be interesting. I think
so an expert and a non-expert. Yeah, Michael Ignor, the non-expert in that.
Yeah, I ran it. Michael Ignor did really well against David Papineau, and I said, okay, well, and he's like raring to go. He wants to do other people. He's going to do Matt Dillahunty on Does God Exist? So I was like, well, you want to do T Jump? I mean, he seems to know how to put an argument together and hold his own. So I'm interested to see how that goes.
I just think the problem there would be, well, I mean, firstly, that Michael Ignor is like a specialist in that area, but also I think Tom can be very good rhetorically. And if someone's not familiar with that style, it could go downhill. But yeah.
Did you watch Michael Ignor and David Papineau?
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah.
I think Michael Ignor might know how to do it. And he's going to do Matt Dillahunty. What are the other upcoming streams? Oh, yeah, this one. Yeah, 3 days in a row. So tomorrow is Michael Ignor and Michael Ignor and T Jump. And then Saturday, well, my Saturday, probably your Friday, is Seth Hart on the demarcation problem. And Nathan has the channel Digital Gnosis, which will be linked in the description. And that's worth checking out if he's got lots of good content answering different arguments from theists and so on. He does it with James Photo quite often. And if you like 8-hour or 10-hour streams, that's the place to go.
Yeah.
I try to keep mine under 2 hours. We've
got a little bit over to go, but yeah.
It's fine. It was a good discussion. Cool. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll end it here. Hare Krishna.